And there we go. So that was a good, that's like, wow, that's again, that's a couple of those that we could go the more we think about it, the more like we could go 8 different ways easily on that a couple of times over. So I think we may come back to that
Yeah, I'm glad
several
you
times.
kept pinging me back because I took your initial question a totally different direction,
Yep.
and I'm glad you pulled me back on that because you're right. There's so many pathways, there's so many branches we could go with this. And ultimately, at least with this one, the big thing is understand what your organization needs or what they want, what their standards are, and really follow that path with what you bring to the table. Now, if you have something great, bleeding edge, cutting edge in a company, say like a Fortune 500, that might not go over well. But if you're bringing it to a hackathon, yes, bring the latest technology, bring something new, try something. That's what hackathons are for. Not trying to do it in a full implementation on a brand new or on an existing application within an organization.
Unless that's the only organization. I mean, I've been to a couple of those where if you got to, like you said, startups and that, sometimes that's the thing to do is they say, hey, this is what we have no legacy. We have nothing. And then it's like, that's the perfect time to do something brand new. Or I've got a customer that they had some level of sprawl. It is in an MVC sort of it's in a an interior architecture. It makes sense that they have a UI, they have an API, they have a database, they've got a mobile, they've got these different silos. But then looking at it, I was like, but I can combine like the web and the API real easy, and then I can share code, and then I have less I have to test because I don't have to, even if it's the exact same code, we'll say in quotes, that we copy and paste from a from our web page that's in whatever language to an API built in the same language. So it's like, say for some reason, we've got JSP front end and we've got a Java backend API. We could copy and paste that code, but then we still need to test it in both of those environments. If we actually have one solution that we're hitting, so we know we're hitting the exact same code, this actually goes into like microservices and stuff like that. A little bit, I guess you could do those things or lambdas and such. But that's again, it goes to the idea of let's have less points of failure. And so that means there's less to test. That means you can actually beat on stuff faster. You can verify, yes, it's good, or hit its bugs a lot quicker because it's also going to be hit more often. So that was sort of where I was thinking on that one. And it was just because that was near and dear to my heart.
The only issue with that is if you don't have established testing in place, doing something like that can be total chaos because you pull code from here, try to work over here. Well, it's not working. Well, why is it not working? Because you don't have the tests or you don't have those requirements defined. So touching and rewriting that code can become complex and very expensive to go from A to B without that testing.
Well,
So
and that's sort of where I'm at is it's because they weren't consistent in how those two things worked. And that's I think we've talked about that. Where like I had one case where I had essentially the same function written 3 different times in this different code because some people hadn't been paying attention to what they were doing. So they kept solving the same problem. And finally had to just like take one. It was basically like, I'm going to take this one. Everybody else is going to call that one. And then we're going to fix everything so that it works that. Yeah, it was a pain in the butt. That's one of those, even if we have the test, we're still going to break it in those other places because they're thinking a little differently about what they're sending in and what they're expecting back. And that's actually what I've been tracking through with a lot of this is I was like, oh, cool. I can do all of this in this API. It's awesome. I can kick the data out. And then I realized that the way they expect that to be packaged back to them varies a little bit. It's like sometimes it's in a response with the status. Sometimes the response has the status, just the whole thing is just munged together. And so it's one of those, it's like, and it's all JSON, so it's easy enough for it's like, oh, okay, here's what it is. And I just got to go grab that node. But if it's expecting a node that's not there, then it blows up. So that's sort of the good and the bad is I can run through it. And if it blows up, then I can go track down and go, oh, something in here is expecting, a different name or a different value or a slightly different format.
what are you testing with?
Me right now,
Okay.
I'm not running like an automated test. I'm
All right.
actually going through and just
Well, I'll throw
it's a
two
mobile
things
app.
out at you to hopefully at some point you can get to this. Rest assured, um, Crap, I forgot the other one. But rest assured, definitely. Oh, and assert J. Apply those to rest assured is the API, open API framework for testing. And if you're testing with any integration points, you can use test containers and mock server to mock the endpoints if you need any integration testing. But definitely do rest assured testing and assert J. And if it fails, it'll tell if you're using assert J, if it fails and it's a specific JSON value that's missing, it will tell you, hey, we're expecting this, but we got this. So assert J gives you a very clean error message as far as data comparison versus unit testing.
Well, but I can't use assert. That's the thing is this is after the fact. So it's like I'm sitting on so it's an Android application that has been built out that is trying to talk to an API that I'm basically going back and I'm moving it to a whole new API. And so it's trying to figure out how to, it's an integration issue at this point because it's basically the API has been updated and has some stuff that's a little bit different and a little bit, there have been some changes in the back end that have to flow all the way to the front end. So now the front end has to change. So I have to look at how is it that it used to look at the API to reuse, because I'm also trying to like minimize code changes on that front end. And so it's like in some cases where it would be, if I was doing it from scratch, then, or if I want to just rewrite that function or that method, I'd say, you know what, I'm going to go do it. And here's where I'm going to grab the values. But since I'm trying to not touch the data, I'm actually using the mobile app as I'm just walking through and using it. And I'm like in, debugger hell or heaven, depending on what you look at. And I just am like going through and stepping through stuff and going, okay, yes, it's making this call. Yes, it's doing this. And just literally combing through the code to figure out where is it doing stuff that's consistent within itself and where is it doing stuff differently and where it is, trying to figure out why they're doing it. And if it is, adjust accordingly. And if not, say, okay, let's just, go back and standardize that to how the AI works. And so it's just one of those, it's like it's walking into, again, it's an existing system that's been around for years and works sort of, but they've got a lot of things that were not so it's re-architecting it almost from scratch. And actually the guy that's the customer was like, it may be easier to build this from scratch. And some of the pieces I have, so it was PHP front end, PHP API. And I looked at all of that stuff and I was like, I'm going to do it all in Python. I'm going to get out of all of that kind of stuff. And it's basically because it was built on a couple of frameworks that were just gotten a little bit out of control. It was a little bit, they didn't understand, I think, what they were doing. So they were relying too much on the framework. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to do it this way because I would rather do it than go back and then figure out all that PHP. And I'm going to rewrite it anyways. Because he said, we've got tons of bugs, but they don't really keep track of them. They just know stuff breaks. They don't, so it's like, okay, let's just do something that we know what's there. We know how it works as opposed to trying to learn somebody else's thousands and thousands of lines of code. And it's turned out faster than I expected.
Is there a way you could essentially stand up a mock server for like hard-coded endpoints, basically just feedback, basically if you make a call, return this, and then change that endpoint, that data to what the change would be, and then see what the front end does with it?
That's sort of what I'm doing, but I don't need a mock server because I've got data and everything else set up. So what I do is I have I'll hit it with the call and look at what it's bringing back, which would be basically what I would do. Otherwise, it would just be a mock. And actually, I guess I've got access to their prior one. So what I do is I'll look at it. I'll say, okay, this isn't working. So I'll go hit the old one and say, well, what were they getting? And then I can go look at the current one and say, okay, well, what are we sending? And go, oh, we renamed a variable, or we've moved the structure around, and then it's it's changing it out. So I've actually got this is one of those. A nice thing in a sense is that I have those, which you would normally need to mock something for. I don't need to because I've got a fully populated database and examples to use. So I can use my mock is actually existing stuff that's been stood up. So it's down to really, it's like, it's almost in, testing mode of it's like, oh, this failed a test. All right, now I've got to go fix the code. So it's like stuff that I can already quickly hit I can find out that it fails quickly. And then it's like, okay, let's figure out how we fix it. Do we want to make it work all like the new stuff does? Or is there something that we missed with the old stuff? Because again, that's also, it's not it is documented, but it's not. There's a lot of documentation, but there's also a lot of details that have sort of been just missed, that have been overlooked. So it's just all in all, it's a really fun project. It's one of those where it's like
Are
just
you writing
digging.
PyTest to go with it so that before you deploy your code, you run, and if your PyTest pass, your deployment goes out, or if it fails, it stops the deployment?
No, not right now. I haven't. I've thought about going back and and I think I'm going to wait because the API is itself a little bit in flux. It is, well, it's like it's the pieces that are there are solid, but it's still growing a little bit. And just because of the time frames, because this is one of those they would love to have it like last month. I'm doing the obligatory. I'm punting on documentation. Like they want pipelines, they want CI/CD, they want all this stuff, and I was like, that's great, but there's only so much we can do in the amount of time. So we're basically going to build this out, and then I'm going to backfill it and say, okay, now go back and like build out all of those things so that we'll have, you know, a real nice, you know, from soup to nuts testing documentation and all that. And it is nice. I mean, it's like a lot of the pieces I'm using are so that it's building documentation. It's sort of like the API has got its own front end and documentation side, things like that. But it's just, yeah, it's one of those. It's do as I say, don't do as I do, because that's exactly what we're running into. But it's also, it's a time thing. It's just like they can't, what they would like to have and what would be the in quotes right way to do it, they can't afford it right now. It's like we've got to move too fast, so we can't go back and retrofit those tests and that documentation. Instead, we're going to have to just sort of like put to-dos all over the place, generate a lot of technical debt, and then come back after the fact. And I've already told them, I was like, look, if we can get to like an alpha/beta release where it's like, okay, now we can get in front of people and so their users can start testing it. It's stable enough that they can start beating on it. Then they can do that. And while we're going through that test debug cycle, then can start generating out some unit tests and some of that kind of pieces so that it's, you know, we can stabilize it essentially.
Are you using Postman at all?
Oh yeah. I use it fairly regularly. I'd say actually now I haven't had to as much because I'm always watching what the mobile app is hitting, but I use Postman a ton for all of those pieces. Anything API related, I'm all about Postman.
So see if there's an equivalent to rest assured for Python. I think there is for future, because I know you do a lot of PHP and Python, but I've noticed there's a lot of equivalents. If you're a very proficient Postman user, it's very easy to go from that to writing rest assured type scripts, because the layout is very similar. It's like if you were to export Postman, it would almost look identical, just writing it in whatever language you're writing it in.
And that's what it's got. They've got one that's basically they've got like it's because Django can do websites, but it also has a REST framework, which is what I've rolled it back into. As I started looking, I was like, shoot, it's going to be a lot easier for me to just reduce effort and roll all this in so that there's one server can serve the web and the API. And if we want to spin it up in two places, so be it. And they also have a test client. There's a Django test client that's built specifically for that as well. So I may use that, or I may use, like I've used Flask and some other things through testing in the past that makes it pretty easy to just crank out unit tests particularly for APIs. So we'll sort of see as I get further into it, which is the easier way to go. And it may be something I assign one of the other guys to. I may, depending on what we've got, I'll be like, hey, here's a handful of tests, start knocking them out. Last time I tried that, it sucked. It was not a very good one. I ended up coming back. Like I'd say, okay, here's like 15 tests I'm expecting you to write. They could write 3 of them because they could only write like the happy path case for each thing. And I'm like, no, it's not that hard. It's like, here's your parameters. Here's some general processes. Like, what if it doesn't exist? What if it's out of bounds? Like all of those kinds of things. What if the server's dead? You know, those things, it's like, these are what you can do to build out your test. And it was just really tough to get that going, but I may swing back around to it because guys have, you know, learned more along the way.
I run into that every day, even with senior guys.
Yeah.
They see a lot of those as, well, you're testing the framework. We don't need to test the framework. I'm like, but wait, this is input. If the input changes, you should be testing user input. And it's a constant argument.
Yeah. I have run into it. I have that argument with myself sometimes. It's like, do I really need to test this? Like, and it's like, usually it's like, no, because the customer will find out when there's a bug and then they'll let me know. But then it's like, no, I need to do it. I ran into that with the customer the other day, is that I would like realize that we had moved really fast on a couple of things. So we had I built something out Selenium that just like runs through the whole site and just tests all this stuff out. And we made a bunch of changes and I hadn't gone back and updated it. So I had one that kicked out and it was like right away you can find it as a user. And if I had updated stuff, I would have found it right away with that. And I was like, and so I told the customer, like, I'm sorry, my bad. I'm going to go back and update those tests and get that stuff. I'm going to go back and update our test suite because we got out of sync, and then your tests are useless at that point. So, all right, well, I am going to go be useless, and I'm going to go shop at Aldi apparently and go get some groceries and stuff. So, we'll wrap this one up, and I guess we'll do it again same time next week, basically, unless we find a better time to do it. Are you done? Did you say the co-starters is done? Are you?
Yeah, we're done. We can go back to our normal time.
Oh, okay. Well, cool. So yeah, we'll maybe catch up and do a little debrief on that. I'll be interested to hear what you got out of it and all that kind of good stuff. May even do that, as an episode next week. I think that'd be sort of cool to just be like, hey, went through this thing. This is what I learned and what we got out of it, because that's honestly what I've been working with the lead generation guys I've had. I just told them today, I was like, I'm going to pause because I haven't gotten any sales out of it. I've gotten some leads, but I haven't gotten sales out of it. And I was like, there's nothing I can do. It's like, if I'm not getting sales out of it, it's not worth spending the money. But a lot of it has been conversations I've had with him. And it's like, well, here's some things you can do. And here's some templates. And here's, some things to try to build a better offer. And I think those things are great for us to cover in, future podcast episodes in particular. It's like, what are some lessons learned that we've learned and are still learning in some cases about how to brand and how to focus. So.
Yeah, the big thing was I got envisionqaup.com. It's now live. And you saw the free stuff. I kind of wish I'd taken screenshots of that before uploading it, but that was the biggest thing, because that almost organically everything on my site came from what they pushed us to for pitch night.
And that's the thing, is I think that's once you have it, you can repurpose it. That's where you can go back and you can put it on your website, and you can put it into flyers, and you can put it out on all of the job sites and into your emails and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I've been trying to get to, is it's, I have not spent enough business development time lately, and I got to get back to that so I can circle back and refine some of those messages and get those updated across the board. So, all right, I'll let you get to it and have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you next time around.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a good one. Hey, bye.